TikTok, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the planet. We are right on time because there is no AP living on Turkish time to slow us all down. So I'm here anyway with Robert Spencer. How you doing, Robert?
Very well, David. How are you?
Good, 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 good. So you've got this new book out, I hear.
It is true. The rumors are confirmed. The book is Muhammad, a critical biography, and it is available now. There it is in stereo, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, look, the books are kissing. Muhammad is kissing Muhammad.
One of them is Dia Al-Kalbi.
Yeah, I just posted a Shia hadith about Muhammad didn't have any milk when he was born, and so Allah gave his uncle Abu Talib the miraculous ability to breastfeed him. So Muhammad used to suck on his uncle's teats for nourishment when he was a baby, and that might explain some things later about like Dihya al-Kalbi and so on. Kids get wired for stuff when they're, you know.
Yep, it's a beautiful thing.
Oddly enough, it explains a lot. We're always wondering what's this queers for Palestine, all this stuff, and now it's starting to make sense, man. It's starting to make sense. The whole thing's starting to make sense. Anyway,
Oh, yeah.
anyway, Robert, how many books you up to now?
This is number 28, David.
28. So Robert is his first goal is to beat the Protestant Bible's 66 books, and then take it from there.
Well, then there's the Catholic Bible 73.
Yeah, then you got your work cut out for you. Got your work cut out
Yes.
for you. Hey, Robert. So as you know, I've not read this. I just got this.
Mhm.
So I can't actually say, hey, everyone needs to read this because it's so awesome. I have not read it. I have read some of your other books, which happened to be awesome. The history of jihad if I had a list of 5 books that people need to read to learn some stuff that needs to become common knowledge, that would be definitely be on the top 5 list of books that people need to get and learn the material in there to understand the world that we're in. But I kind of like how it's like you've been systematically going through Islam like piece by piece. So you've got the critical Quran, exposing a lot of things about the Quran way back. I think the first book I read of yours was The Politically Incorrect Guide to, what was it, Islam and the
Yeah,
Crusades or something like that?
yeah, that
Yes,
was way back.
I read that one, and then I read The Truth About Muhammad. And so very interesting. So I don't know. You seem to go like systematically through all the various topics, going after Muhammad, but in different ways, going after the Quran, jihad, all this stuff. And you've got your new one here. Muhammad, a critical biography. So you're back to going after Muhammad, but in a bit of a different way, because you had your book, Did Muhammad Exist? And then you had The Truth About Muhammad. The Truth About Muhammad was just going through what the Muslim sources say about Muhammad. And then the Did Muhammad Exist was actually questioning whether you can trust this biographical material about Muhammad at all, or is there another explanation? And so now you've got Muhammad, a critical biography. And I just want to say here at the beginning, books you need to get. History of Jihad, you definitely need to get that, ladies and gentlemen. If you don't have that already, the link is in the description box. The Critical Quran, that link to that is in the description box. And then, Robert, I can't tell people that they have to get this. That's up to you to make
Yeah,
your
you can.
case today. You have to you have to make that case here in this live stream.
Okay.
Um,
Well, yeah, you have to get this because this is, if you liked The Truth About Muhammad and Did Muhammad Exist, and if you found them enlightening, then you will find this to be all the more. This is like part 3 of the Muhammad series. What we have in Muhammad, a critical biography, is I take the findings from Did Muhammad Exist? to show how shaky all the material is about Muhammad's life. And I go into the material about Muhammad's life. And I don't think anybody's ever done this before. As a matter of fact, I'm fairly sure nobody's ever done this before. And I compare the stories to each other and show that a lot more is variable about Muhammad's life than people think. I think most people think, well, he was born in 570, he died in 632, he became a prophet in 610, Gabriel appeared to him, he was 12 years in Mecca and then 10 years in Medina. Every part of that and more that I have just mentioned is contradicted by other Islamic traditions that are just as good as the ones in the mainstream.
Now, that is interesting because I've debated you on whether Muhammad existed. I've debated Jay Smith on whether Muhammad existed, and we were just talking about this on your channel. But I always start by acknowledging how difficult it is to argue anything about Muhammad based on solid ground, because you just don't have early sources. The earliest biographical source on Muhammad came from more than a century after his time. And so when you have that giant window, lots of different things could happen, and there are lots of different explanations that people could give. And so you're pointing out that the basic timeline even would be in question, because that's normally what I say to Muslims. I'll say, look, I have all kinds of doubts about lots of things in your sources, but I agree with you on the basic timeline, that he's born sometime around 570, that he starts receiving his revelations around 610, that, you have the flight from Mecca to Medina around 622, dies around 632. So I don't grant that the angel Gabriel appeared to him. I think that was some sort of demon, or maybe an early Diha, since it was choking him. I don't know. But so anyway, there's lots of room for skepticism there. But you're saying that even the core stuff, the basic timeline, even, that someone like me would say, hey, I'm skeptical of a lot of stuff in your sources, but I grant this basic timeline. You're pointing out even that basic timeline is in question, not just according to you, according to Muslim sources even.
Yeah, you have 23 years, right? That's the name of Ali Dashti's famous book, the Iranian dissident's book, 23 years, the career of Muhammad. And that's a wonderful book as well, people. But in any case, there's no agreement on how that 23 years is divided up. And the problem is the 3 years, that you've got 10 years in Mecca, 10 years in Medina. That pretty much everybody agrees on. Mm-hmm. But the 3 years, people don't know. There are some traditions that say that he was quiet for 3 years, like St. Paul right after he was converted, and he went into the desert for a long period of time before he came out and started to preach. Same thing here, that they're saying he didn't do anything. He was praying, he was getting to know Allah, and so on. Some people say it was in Mecca. Some people say that he spent the 3 years in Medina. And there is a lot of slippage about what exactly happened. And that kind of slippage is in line with the idea that these are stories that are made up, and people change them in accord with whatever point they want to make, because these stories are being fabricated by different factions of Muslims. And so there ends up being some differences in even the smallest details.
And even as you're talking about that, I noticed just when you're going through the main sources, Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, the main sources that Sunni Muslims would go to learn about Muhammad, you'll see differences in there. You'll read one hadith and it'll say Muhammad was in Mecca for 10 years. After he concluded that he's a prophet. You'll read another, it'll say he was in Mecca for 12 years, and so on. So you have those kinds of differences. But what you're talking about now sounds very similar to Joshua Little. Now, he wrote his dissertation for very different purposes. He wrote his Oxford doctoral dissertation mainly to respond to people like us who criticize Muhammad based on based on material that we read in the sources about Muhammad having sex, marrying a 6-year-old and having sex with a 9-year-old girl. And he attempted to refute the Islamophobes like us, but he did it by attacking the reliability of sources. And this was very interesting because it's kind of similar to what you're talking about. And it's like, it's interesting because he'll make a point and it's like, oh, I know that's true because I've read that. I've read that over and over again. In other words, he calls into question in his doctoral dissertation the general reliability even of the hadiths. He's saying basically people were cooking up hadiths to justify whatever point they were trying to make at that time. And he argues that Islam at that time was kind of regional. You had one kind of Islam around Medina, then you had another kind of Islam around Kufa, and so on. And they had different rules where they were. They had different rules depending on where they were. And then at some point they tried to replace this with a kind of pan-Islam, like everyone has to be the same. But all these guys were tracing their region's doctrines back to a companion of Muhammad by making up isnads. And so that's why he argued that you'll go to the exact same hadith collection and find sahih narrations saying things like, oh, Muhammad allowed mutta for a while, but then he forbade it, and then it wasn't allowed anymore. And you'll go a couple hadiths later, and it'll say, no, we practiced mutta throughout the time of Muhammad and into the time of the rightly guided caliphs. And it was a later caliph who forbade. And it's like, wait a minute, these are in the exact same collection. They meet the exact same criteria of an authentic narration, and they're completely contradicting each other. So you guys have sources that completely contradict each other, and they're equally reliable and valid according to this. So there's a problem. In other words, someone is clearly making things up, even among the Sahih narrations, because guess what? If Muhammad forbade it and someone said, no, he didn't, okay, that person's making things up. If it was a later caliph who forbade it, not Muhammad, but the hadith says that Muhammad forbade the practice, then someone was making that up. So anyway, the point is, even in their most trusted collections, you have stuff that's being made up, that's being fabricated. And so that can't possibly be in question if you have hadiths that are contradicting each other. So now the question becomes, how much is being fabricated? It's clear, and I would say indisputable, and I would say any Muslim who looks at contradictory sources in the same hadith collection has to acknowledge people were making things up, and that they're making things up that even pass the requirements for Sahih narrations. And so even if they have the slightest bit of intellectual honesty, have to acknowledge later Muslims were clearly making things up. So the question becomes, how much were they making up? And it sounds like you and Jay Smith and others are thinking that they were making up more than I would suspect. So we're gonna talk about that. But let's dial it back before we get into the critical stuff, and go back to sort of your truth about Muhammad. Now, watch what a dirtbag I am, Robert. Watch what a dirtbag I am here.
Muhammad.
Yeah. Sorry, I've got Muhammad on the screen. I should have put Muhammad, like his picture up on the screen for this. But anyway, so we got this book. You're about to make your case for this book. I told people you got the link to get this at Amazon in the description box, and definitely everyone needs Critical Quran. Everyone needs history of jihad. Given the current political situation, I would say everyone should grab the Palestinian Delusion. But going back to the truth about Muhammad, watch what a dirtbag I am, Robert. It's actually available on PDF online, so I'm not even going to tell people to buy it. So
that's the worst. That's the worst. I thought you were going to say something like, "Oh, it's a bad book" or something like. No, that's even worse.
Yeah. So all right. So but
it is available at Amazon.
Yeah. The history, and that awesome book, if you just want what the Muslim sources say. So you've had what the Muslim sources say about Muhammad, and you go through that. And then you got, hey, we need to take a really critical look at whether we can trust anything about Muhammad. That was, did Muhammad exist? And now you're sort of combining a lot about that. But it is important for people to keep in mind the sort of Muhammad that you get when you believe the sources, and how this is related to modern modern Islam and things that happen. So, apart from approaching this critically, if you just go to the Muslim sources, Robert, what kind of Muhammad do we read about, and how is that connected to things that are going on in the world?
Well, David, actually, Muhammad, a critical biography, does both of those things. It gives you the Islamic view of Muhammad and also gives you, at the same time, all the problems with the historical narratives. And it's important to have both because we know, of course, we know from the jihad activity that we talk about every week, we know from what Muslims are doing and saying around the world that there are people who take very seriously what they think Muhammad said and did, and they imitate it. And so it's very important for non-Muslims to know that. But also, it's important to know, for a variety of reasons, how shaky what shaky ground these stories are on. And I can actually show you how, in Muhammad, a critical biography, those two things are combined in one story. And also how the Islamic apologists in the West mislead people actively about
What?
Muhammad. I was going to talk
Dawa,
about
guys?
Joshua Little. Since you mentioned Joshua Little, I want to get back to him later. But first, we got Eric Ormsby. Eric Ormsby is a professor somewhere. He's an authority on Islam and all that in the establishment, the academic establishment. And you can find an article online where he says that the Hadith give a charming picture of Muhammad, that Muhammad is a charming person, and that there are stories where he laughed so hard that his back teeth
Yeah, you can see his
showed.
molars.
And these are, Ormsby says, charming stories. Now, in the first place, I show in the book that it ain't all that charming in context because it involves Muhammad ordering one of his warriors, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, to shoot one of the Quraysh who's making fun of a Muslim woman. And he shoots him, and when the guy falls over dead, Muhammad starts laughing until his back teeth were showing. But also, that is a story that you find in connection with the Battle of Uhud. However, you can go on in the and also Sahih Hadith collections, and you see another version of the same story with the Battle of the Trench. And it's once again Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, but instead of a Quraysh warrior who is laughing because a Muslim woman tripped and her private parts were showing because her dress was thrown high when she tripped, and he laughs, and then the Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas shoots him. Muhammad laughs heartily. In the other story, this is not Uhud at all. It's the Battle of the Trench, and it's once again Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, but it's a Quraysh warrior who is taunting the Muslims, making fun of them, and then hiding behind his shield. But Sa'd is such a good shot that as soon as the next time the guy peeks out to taunt the Muslims, he gets him right between the eyes, and then Muhammad once again laughs. So you have Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas in both stories, you have Muhammad laughing in both stories, but you have two different battles and two different reasons why Sa'd shot the guy. Now, it's not that this happened twice. I think that that's the first possibility that we can entertain but throw out. That there were two occasions when Muhammad and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas are standing together, right? And some Quraysh warrior
Talk about deja vu, Sa'd.
Yeah, exactly. So that I think, forget that. What we have are two developed versions of the same story. And in one, it's a Muslim woman trips, the Quraysh warrior starts laughing, and so Sa'd gets him, and Muhammad laughs even heartier. And then in the other story, the Muslim is the Quraysh warrior rather is taunting the Muslims. Sa'd shoots him, and Muhammad laughs. So, in both cases, you have a Quraysh warrior being killed for taunting the Muslims, and he gets shown up, but it's under very different circumstances in two different battles. Now, it's very clear, it seems to me, that that shows these stories were developed for different purposes at different times. That maybe in one locality, like Joshua Little was saying, they had the one version, and in another they had a different one. Now, where Little goes wrong is that he thinks that you can tell from the Isnad chains and how they were forged which stories come earlier and later. He makes what seems like a good point. He says that in the stories about Aisha, he's trying to prove that Aisha was not 9, that those stories were not authentic, which in the first place is a ridiculous counsel of despair, a ridiculous exercise to try to engage in, because it's clear Muslims around the world think those stories are authentic and imitate Muhammad in marrying children. It's all over Afghanistan and elsewhere.
Yeah, let's pause that. Let's pause that real quick, and then you want to continue, but that's very important. That's very important. So there are kind of two levels of argumentation here, and you're saying both are going on in Muhammad, a critical biography. Yes. But so I guess the point would be you've got people like Joshua Little saying, hey, these hadiths are unreliable, even though, I mean, he says there are over 200 of them. He says there are over 200 hadiths about Muhammad consummating the marriage with Aisha when she was 9 years old. He calls all of them into question. They're all unreliable because he treats the hadith as generally unreliable. You have to use some very difficult historical investigation to get to kernels of truth in these late sources. But the point you were just making is, even though you would also challenge the reliability of the hadiths, there's a different sense in which that's somewhat irrelevant because Muslims around the world take these seriously and they're building their lives around them. And so, in other words, the result, if Joshua Little were completely successful in all he's doing, he would be completely successful against us, and that's it. In other words, he would be convincing us and people who listen to us that these sources can't be trusted. This would have no real world implications in the Muslim world because they still take these sources seriously, and they're not getting their information about Muhammad from Joshua Little. They're not. They're getting it from these sources.
And that's what Joshua Little wants to do. He makes that very clear, that he thinks Islamophobes, which is a word that he freely uses, and I think I have very little respect for anybody who uses that word in a serious context. But in any case, he says Islamophobes use this story to make Muhammad look bad. And that's why he wants to discredit the story. He doesn't even acknowledge the reality of the fact that child marriage is a problem throughout the Islamic world in a unique manner from elsewhere in the world. And he certainly doesn't want to accept that it has anything to do with Muhammad's example. So his intent is entirely apologetic. And that's where he departs from history, and that's where his argument is weak. And the weak part of it is here. He says that the hadiths are forged. Granted, absolutely, yes. He says the isnad chains are forged. Granted, no doubt. And he also makes a very interesting argument that you can tell the earlier versions of a hadith from the later by the isnad chain, even though they're forged, because he says that if they are a bunch of nobodies in the isnad chain, then it's an earlier version. Whereas when they were revised, they want to make them more, as isnads become more important, which comes later in Islamic tradition, they want to make a hadith more important. They put a bunch of big names in the isnads. And then that shows that, he says, that you have a later version if you've got a bunch of big names in the isnads versus an earlier version with a bunch of nobodies. Makes sense on the face of it.
Does.
But I think that what he is doing is he is assuming the internet age. He's assuming an age of massive information access. Whereas what you're talking about is an age where you could have one community over here in Iraq and another community over here in Jordan, and they have no contact with one another. And they don't know who the big names are. Maybe the nobodies in the one isnad chain are the big names in that locality. And so there's no way to be sure that they would have revised the isnad chains in the way that Little assumes.
Let
And
me.
so you can't tell from that. You can play devil's advocate in a second, but
Uh-huh.
you see what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
That there's no way to tell from that which are the earlier and which are the later. But really, ultimately, he's on kind of a fool's errand because he's exploding the historicity of the Aisha hadiths in a way that explodes the historicity of all the hadiths. But we can get to that after this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for everyone who, because I read that in Little's dissertation as well, and he's talked about it in various discussions and interviews and live streams and so on. But the idea here is, which I found interesting, was the point he was making is non-Muslim Western Hadith scholars, and there are not a lot of them. There haven't been a lot of them. But the non-Muslim Hadith scholars, their methodology is almost the opposite of the Muslim methodology. The Muslims, the Orthodox Sunni Muslims, they go to a source. So they look up a hadith and they look at that chain of names, and they want every name on there to be the name of a great, upstanding, wonderful Muslim transmitter. And they look at that and they say, look at this hadith. Yeah, it's from 250 years after the time of Muhammad, but look at this awesome list of names. That's how we know this hadith is as good as gold. Whereas the non-Muslim hadith scholars, they look at that chain and they go, that is obviously made up, obviously, because the methodology, hadith methodology, developed over time, and it wasn't really fully realized until, about 2 centuries after the time of Muhammad, when you have people like Bukhari and Imam Muslim putting their collections together. That's when you have here are all the criteria of a good of a sound isnad and so on. So it's a later methodology.
You don't even have isnads in the earliest hadith collections.
Yeah. So his point is, whenever you have a really great isnad chain, it's clearly invented after the methods were formalized, and so they look at broken chains or missing chains or incomplete chains or chains that don't go all the way back to Muhammad. They look at those and say, see, those hadiths are actually earlier and more reliable, because if they had come after the method was fully formalized, then they would have made up really, really great isnad chains. Since they didn't, the only good explanation is that they came from before the time when you had this robust hadith methodology, and therefore you actually trust those more. So a Muslim scholar will look at those hadiths and say, you can't trust them because of the broken chain. And that's why you need this one with this impeccable chain. And the non-Muslim scholars look at the impeccable chain. They go, clearly fabricated after you guys came up with your methodology. This one has the broken chain, therefore it's actually more reliable. And you're pointing out that since we don't know everything that was going on, and Islam was regional, you could have one area where they're fine with broken chains and a different area where they want the completely sound isnads, and you can't really put these things in order according to either camp.
I think he's assuming way too much about what we can know about the development of the isnad chains. That it might be that a hadith with a terrific isnad chain, it's not because it has been multiply revised, but that it comes from an area where those were the people who were the recognized authorities. And later, since they became more recognized authorities in a more general sense, it takes on a greater weight, but it didn't have it in the beginning. And you can take ones that are broken chains and argue in exactly the same way that he does about the ones with great chains and say this could have been revised in this direction for reasons that are unknown to us at this point. Maybe these people were the big stars in this particular area. And so there's no way to tell from the isnad chains whether one is earlier or later. And in any case, he's just apologetic in intent. I think the main point that he and I would agree on is that the hadith are forged, that all of these stories were written by factions of the Muslims in order to get supporters for their point of view. And that's why the whole corpus is full of contradictions and not historical. You can even take things that are widely known, like the Kutam business. You know that there are traditions that are where it says Muhammad was originally named Kutam. Why would anybody invent that if his name was known to be Muhammad all along? But if you have traditions about a man named Kutam that were folded into the Muhammad legend, well, then that explains why you have to explain away this alternative name appearing here and there.
So, you're basically challenging. You're basically challenging, obviously, the Muslim scholars who treat these things as generally reliable, especially if they're Sahih and so on, and they meet the requirements that their scholars over time have come up with. But you're also challenging the Western scholars who are operating on principles that, as you point out, they make sense, right? It makes sense. Like when I read that section in Little's dissertation and pointing out that actually, according to non-Muslim scholars, these broken chains would be more reliable because they're probably earlier, because they later Muslims inventing these things would have actually done them differently. They would have done them differently, and therefore they're earlier. As much as that would make sense to someone like me, you're challenging that.
I'm challenging that. Yes, that there may have been any number of reasons why Muslims at that time would not have wanted to tamper with an isnad chain that we would consider to be broken or weak. And that is something that we can't know in every specific case. But he's just assuming that if you had a hadith that has enduring popularity and grows in influence, that the isnad chain is going to be adjusted. Well, it might have ended up in the hands of people who thought that was an illegitimate thing to do, because they really did believe in some kind of spurious authenticity for all of this. And so he's assuming way too much.
Way too much. So, I actually, this was actually in my mind way back when we debated this. So we debated, did Muhammad exist? And I had the same debate with Jay Smith. And I love the idea of the topic, because I would only defend Muhammad. And you and I tag team debated Sheikh Omar Bakri and Anjem Chowdhury on whether Muhammad exists. And I actually started off saying, guys, I believe you can defend the existence of Muhammad, but not using your methods, because your methods suck. You'd have to use non-Islamic methods to even make a serious case, and you guys won't do that, and therefore I don't think you have a case. And their argument was. The Quran talks about Muhammad, therefore Muhammad must have existed. But anyway, so when I debated you and when I debated Jay Smith, I basically had the same overall case. But my idea was, this is just hilarious, because I'm saying we only know Muhammad existed because of a secondary sort of historical principle called the principle of embarrassment, where if you're going to be inventing a religion or a religious figure to get people to believe in him, you're probably going to invent good things, not things that are embarrassing to you. And so when you find Muhammad performed miracles in hadiths that come 2 centuries after his time, you go back to the Quran and it's over and over again denies that he could perform miracles. It's like glaringly obvious that people were making things up in that sense. But you can see why it makes sense when Muhammad is being challenged in his own time, and then as Islam is spreading, they're going out into different areas, and they're constantly being challenged. Wait, you want us to believe in this guy? What miracles did he perform? And the Quran is his miracle, the Quran, and it just wasn't impressive to anyone. So it makes sense that they'd be fabricating lots of stories about Muhammad's miracles. But then you read other things like the satanic verses, or Muhammad taking the wife of his own adopted son, or all these embarrassing little details and stories. Muhammad thinking that he's a victim of black magic. Muhammad's first impression of his revelations being that they were demonic. Muhammad repeatedly trying to commit suicide, going up the mountain and trying to hurl himself off, and then he gets stopped by Gabriel and so on. All this stuff that Muslims now have to explain. I was looking at that and saying, if we know if I have to build a case that Muhammad existed, it would just be there's no way these people would make up all of this embarrassing material about Muhammad. That's what I'm getting to. That's what I'm getting to. 1 second, right? So, if anything is reliable about Muhammad, you can't go to the miracle stories. We know those are fabricated. Regular stuff. Oh, Muhammad went to the market. You can make that. You can make that stuff up. It makes sense to make that stuff up if you're fabricating a story about someone. The embarrassing material. I look at this and I go, no one would make this up. And so I conclude that the only reason it's here is because they knew it was true. And if it was true, then Muhammad existed. So that's my case. Then you and Jay are arguing, actually, this stuff is so unreliable, we can't even know Muhammad existed, or that these sources actually refer to something else or someone else or something like that. And so in my mind, it's just like, ha, 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 whoever wins, Islam's kind of screwed, right? If I say we know that Muhammad existed because of all this embarrassing material, good. If you show that even the embarrassing material is unreliable and we can't know anything about Muhammad, good. Either way, I like the outcome. But I'm guessing you would say the exact same what I was just saying right now about the satanic. I look at the satanic verses and I say, why in the name of common sense would someone invent that? I look at some of the other stories. No, so I'm guessing you would say the same thing that you would say about like the broken hadith chains. You don't know what was going on in that region, David, or what was popular in a particular region. You don't have information on this anymore. And therefore, you can't trust it. You can't trust this material even on those grounds because you don't know what they were thinking back then.
But wait, there's more. Because particularly with the satanic verses, you actually reeled off. I wish I should have had pen and paper here, but I guess we're not doing the debate tonight. But in any case, you reeled off all these embarrassing aspects of Muhammad's life. I'd like to hit as many as possible, but satanic verses. Okay. In the first place, you're dealing with a prophet who's being created by committee, that people are making up hadiths left and right. Now we know this is standard Islam, right? I'm not saying something controversial there because we know that Bukhari, for example, collected 600,000 hadith and rejected 593,000 of them as inauthentic. So Bukhari knew that people were forging hadiths. Muslims should have no problems today admitting that Muslims were forging hadiths. Okay, so you have people forging hadiths left and right, and they contradict each other all over the place. As you have noted, even in the Sahih hadith collections, they contradict each other. You turn the page, and they contradict each other. So what do you have? You have this story where Muhammad gets a revelation and then cancels it and says Satan inspired him. What's going on there? The people who are putting this all together realize that this material is full of contradictions, full of stuff that doesn't make sense. So they've got to have an explanation for the contradictions. And so the whole satanic verses story makes perfect sense as something that is given to the people to explain away whenever they come upon some of these contradictions in the hadith. They can say, well, look, Muhammad was sometimes inspired by Satan. And so whenever we abrogate or cause to be forgotten a verse, then we give you one that's just as good or better. That's Quran 2:106. And he had this long story about Alat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, and it explains the whole thing. And see, to us nowadays, so many centuries later, we think, okay, but if he's saying he was inspired by Satan at one point, then he's destroying his entire prophetic claim. But we're assuming, if we say, well, that means he was authentic, and this is an embarrassing story that they would have not invented, so it has to be real, we're assuming that was embarrassing. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe they wanted to show that even if Satan threw into, as the Quran says, Muhammad's revelations, that they would cancel what Satan threw in and fix it, that Allah would always protect the revelation. So you can trust the revelation, because even when Satan confuses the prophet, it gets fixed. And that's the way in which the story is not embarrassing, and it makes perfect sense, and it's totally fabricated.
Give
me another.
No, I'm gonna challenge you on that particular one, because that's. Seriously, as embarrassing as Muhammad thinking his revelations were demonic and so on. And the story about him being a victim of black magic. It's basically two stories, and I know you have quite a bit to say about Muhammad and Zayd and Zainab and that story, which these are basically two stories that we know were very embarrassing to an early Muslim community because one, they're coming up with all these different ways of defending Muhammad's relationship with Zainab, and because we have all these different versions of the satanic verses story, and they kind of get more and more increasingly watered down over time. And so if you're constantly watering it down, it's clear that it's clear that it's embarrassing to you.
Yeah.
So anyway,
But
the point is
the original, the earliest iterations, that the whole thing was invented to explain away the contradictions in all this material.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying if you
But
sort
then
of
they're stuck with it.
no, if you line up with all the different versions of it, it looks like by the time you get to the time of like Bukhari and so on, writing the hadith collections and the stories being weeded out, if you go to other sources and you sort of line them up, you get like a timeline where the earliest version of the story is exactly what we're familiar with in this with the satanic verses narration. It's Muhammad really, really wants his tribe to accept Islam, but they won't. So sad. He's longing for a revelation, so he finally gets the revelation. It affirms prayers to their pagan goddesses are good because those pagan goddesses can carry their prayers up to Allah for them and so on. And then Muhammad delivers this revelation to his followers. He bows down in honor of these revelations. His followers bow down. Then the pagans bow down too. Then there's this brief period where everyone's on the same page. And then Gabriel comes in and says, "What'd you do? Where'd you get that revelation?" Muhammad said, "What? I got it from you." Wrong. You didn't. You got that from Satan. And then Muhammad freaks out and he feels all bad and so on. So you look at that, but that story rapidly starts changing. It eventually starts changing into Muhammad didn't utter the satanic verses. Satan imitated him, made him sound. He could imitate Muhammad's voice, like the Terminator and so on. And then eventually get to, by the time of Bukhari gives like the most watered down. He just mentions that people bowed down in honor of that surah when it was revealed. He doesn't say why. He says even the pagans bowed down in honor of that surah. And you're like, wait, why? Why are they being? It makes no sense in context. Why are they bowing down? So even there's a clear remnant of it. So my view would be if it's kind of being watered down, and you can kind of see the end result is to remove it because their theology changed. And like the original theology of God's protection of the prophets would be Allah would protect a true prophet from persisting in error. So this is along the lines of what you're saying, that that Allah would protect a true prophet from persisting in error, and therefore if you commit a major error, it's fine, but He's going to take you out of it. And it doesn't mean you're not a prophet because He takes you out of it if you're a true prophet. He takes you out of the error. Later on, their doctrine changed to Allah will protect a true prophet from committing any major error. And therefore, the satanic verses story no longer fit, and it had to be significantly changed based on their theology. And so, my view is if this is being watered down over a period of many, many decades, kind of looks like it has a really early origin and not something that came along like a century or something after the time of Muhammad.
Well, maybe it did have an early origin, but it is still forged. It's still fabricated. Because when you talk about early origin, you're totally speculating in the first place because we don't have any written records before Ibn Hisham. And we have a couple of minor written records before Ibn Hisham, but nothing major. And so you have all this material that contains the original version of the story. And then the contradictions become apparent, especially as Muhammad grows in importance in Islamic theology. And so this story does become embarrassing later and has to be explained away. But right at the beginning, it's designed to address one particular problem. And it's kind of like making a bed with a sheet that's too short. You address one particular problem and it just opens up another. You fold it around one corner and the other corner opens up. And so it's like that. They fixed the one problem of the contradictions, but they opened up this other problem that suggesting Muhammad was inspired by Satan. And so they had to fix that later by watering down the story.
We did have a request here from Jintao. David, will you take super chats during the stream? We'll take the first.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, let's take this first batch, and then you have some. I'm assuming you have some thoughts on the issue of Muhammad, Zayd, and Zainab.
Yeah, Muhammad, Zayd, and Zainab. That's a great one.
Okay, we'll take a few super chats, and then we'll go into that one. So Abraham Harb says Mike Winger and Spencer talking Islam. Good stuff. Someone block.
I don't, I'm not, I don't watch videos. I'm not up on these people. I have no idea. I've heard this name before, but who is this Mike Winger?
Mike Winger, he's this like super nerd, Star Trek. Everything is about Star Trek nerd, and he talks like this the entire time in his videos. And anyway, people make fun of him because he's a total nerd. But don't think, oh, he's a nerd. Yeah, don't think, oh, he's a nerd in like a good sense of being a really nice nerd. No, the guy's pure evil and a nerd.
But why? What's the deal with it saying Mike Winger and Spencer talking Islam? That's
people are calling
you to Mike Winger.
Yeah. They know he's my arch nemesis, so they keep saying horrible things like that until they get blocked. David Wood, David Wood, do you think disabled people are cursed by God, or do you think it is a mistake made by God? Village of Words, I can go ahead and give you Jesus' response. I'll give you Jesus' response. That is here at the beginning of John chapter 9. Says, as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus said, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And so that's Jesus responding to it being brought up to him that this guy has been born, this guy's born blind. And so wait, is it a curse on him? Is it a curse on his parents or something like that? Jesus says, neither. Now there can be different things going on in the world, but yeah, we're in a fallen world. You can't just say, oh, something bad has happened with this person, therefore it's because of this or that. Bad things happen in general to people. So yeah, you can't make that correlation between, it's a constant mistake people make. Oh, look, you stubbed your toe. It must be because you did this earlier. And so you don't live in a perfect world. What's the chance Uthman invented Muhammad?
0. There's nothing from Uthman's time. Uthman died in 656. And you have hardly any mentions of Muhammad, and none of them correspond to Islamic tradition. And you have 0 mention of the Quran Uthman is supposed to have collected, and 0 mention of Islam. And so if Uthman invented Muhammad, everybody was very quiet about it. You don't start hearing about Muhammad as a separate person until 35 years after Uthman, when Abdul Malik constructed the Dome of the Rock and put on the walls, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. And even that is not necessarily about Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, because every bit of the rest of the statement, which goes on for quite a long time, is about Jesus, suggesting that Muhammad is being used as a title in this case, and that it's referring to Jesus, and that the whole statement, taken in its entirety, is a declaration that Jesus is not divine, but only a prophet.
And that's something that in our debates I have to acknowledge as an issue. And it's similar to the hadith issue, where when you're reading the hadith and you find hadiths that are equally sahih and they're completely contradicting each other, it's okay, you clearly have a problem in your methodology and so on. It's clear that there's some level of fabrication going on. There's some degree of fabrication going on. The question then becomes, how much? But it's similar with the issue of Muhammad. If you read the Muslim sources, Muhammad is going around, he's challenging all the leaders of his time, he's wreaking havoc. All the non-Muslim rulers are terrified of him. They know he's a prophet. They're sitting there having discussions. What do we do about this guy? He's obviously a prophet. What are we going to do? Everyone's in panic mode because Muhammad is taking over. And you go back to the sources of that time, no one's ever heard of the guy. And you don't have anyone panicking over him. So it's clear that there's some level of embellishment going on here, right? You are clearly embellishing stories of Muhammad's significance. I mean, obviously, I would say indisputably, it has to be. And so the question then becomes, how much? Is it enough to just account for this, or is it significantly more, as Robert and Jay would argue?
Yeah, there's a tremendous wish fulfillment hadith about Muhammad. Well, you're really just talking about sending the letters to all the
Yeah.
emperors and kings saying to convert, and long hadiths about Heraclius, the Roman emperor, being so impressed with Muhammad and wanting to convert, but the bishops and the courtiers tell him that he better not, he'll lose his throne, and
Yeah.
so on. And when I wrote Empire of God last year, a history of the Roman Byzantine Empire, I noticed that in all the records from Heraclius's time, there isn't any mention of Muhammad at all. They didn't have any idea about this guy, much less that he's writing letters and scaring Heraclius with them.
Yeah, so some definitely, and indisputably some level of embellishment. The question is how much. If you dial it, if you say a lot, you don't know pretty much anything about Muhammad. Good times. These are good times to be in. Does Muhammad take a vacation during Adhan month?
That's a very important point. Very important point. In chapter 9 of the Quran, it says there are only 12 months in the year. And you know that the Arabic Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar that's shorter than the solar calendar. And so it loses, I believe it's 5 to 10 days every year. And that's why the Islamic holidays move throughout the year. And the month of Ramadan is sometimes in the summer, sometimes in the winter, etc. And so it used to be, before Surah 9 of the Quran, the Arabs had an extra month that would make up for the difference between the solar and the lunar calendars. A leap month, not just a leap day is what we call a leap year, but it's just an extra day every 4 years. They would have a whole month every few years to correct the discrepancy.
Must be
And
nice.
the Quran does away with that. But in all the voluminous hadith which come 200 years after the leap month was abolished, we know incredibly this huge amount of detail about Muhammad's life and when he did it all. Most of it is dated very precisely, and yet he never does anything during the leap months. And yet, by the standard chronology, Surah 9 is one of the last to be revealed. He should have had his whole life been doing stuff during the leap months. But every time one comes around, apparently he just takes the month off.
You have a very interesting challenge here, Robert. Seriously, this would be.
I never heard of Mary Harb.
I have.
Yeah.
She has some scary intellectual abilities to pour through massive amounts of sources and information, and is pretty brutal. If she weren't so busy doing other stuff, I think she would be wrecking Islam by herself.
I'm willing, but I don't know her. And so if you, Cereal Bowl, if you know this person, you can say, okay, well, you can contact her if you want.
Matter of fact, if you want to have the debate on this channel between you and Mary, I would make sure you guys know each other beforehand and so on. And but
okay.
I actually think she'd be the best at making the case against you and Jay on the planet.
Well, great. That's great. I'm happy to do it. I don't really have the patience. I'm getting old, and I don't really have the patience anymore to debate these idiots who, they lie and bluster and thump their chests and all that, like Hakikaju and those guys. Yeah. But if there's a serious scholar who wants to discuss these things in a mutually respectful manner, I'm all for it.
Yeah, that would be Mary, but I have to say I would not want to be the one debating her. But anyway, we can talk. Yeah, we can talk about that in the near future, and I'll even we'll see what we can we'll see if we can set up something. But that would be interesting. Hi, D Wood, Robert. Do you think that Momo was a Nestorian cursed by Church of East based on sources from 7th century Patriarch Isoyab III?
Well, I discussed those sources in the book, so Get Muhammad, a Critical Biography, and you can read about that.
Wait, this one?
That's the one, man.
But yes. How could they get such a book, Robert?
Well, David, it's at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and if there are any bookstores out there, ask them to order it.
And the link is in the description box, too.
That's right.
Yep.
So, in any case, there are traces in the traditions of a Nestorian influence. And remember Waraka bin Naufal, Khadijah's uncle, who is identified as a Nestorian priest. Although he's also identified as Jewish, it's a little bit confused, as is everything in the Hadith. But it may be that the idea that Jesus is not divine is a corruption of Nestorianism, which makes a strong separation between the divine and human natures of Christ. It's possible.
Robert, I saw you on Jaipur Dialogue. Your work, you should visit India. As persecuted Hindu in future Londonistan, I may have to move back to India anyway. Wow, this is someone saying that he's a Hindu who moved to London, and now London is becoming too dangerous for Hindus, and he said he may have to move back to India. We've been seeing that stuff a lot about people who actually fled Iraq or Syria or something like this, but they're actually leaving. Some people are actually like, I want to get to a safer place, and then they're getting to like the UK and going, this is worse. This is becoming worse, and I want to go back because it's better back there. Wild stuff.
Well, I may end up having to live there if things go bad in the United States. So
we're all moving to India.
Yes.
We're all moving to India. We might need a good spot in India. We're all going to have to move to India because it's the only place we're going to be safe in the future.
Yes.
Let's see. Hi, Robert. Is your Muhammad a critical biography better than the Sealed Nectar? The latter. Guys, couple points here. So you said the Sealed Nectar. The latter was pretty trash for a so-called award-winning book. All right. I'll just say, again, this is new. I have not read Muhammad, a critical biography. I have read 4 or 5 of Robert's other books. They were all awesome, usually best in their category. And so, even without reading this, even if I disagree with some of Robert's ideas, I'm pretty darn sure, just based on past reading, that it's going to be a good book. With that said, you could point to any random book by any person in the world that I've never seen before, and I would guarantee you it's better than a Sealed Nectar, because that's pure propaganda garbage.
Yes. The Sealed Nectar is combined apologetics and just a straight retelling of the standard Islamic story. So what Muhammad, a critical biography, does is show how weak that standard Islamic story really is in the Islamic traditions themselves.
Snudgewick says, what evidence shows Muhammad was squeezed in a cave? So what do you think about those sources? Because you obviously don't believe in them. So we're...
Well, I think that this stuff has demonic influence, actually. And so when you have, I don't know what the provenance of the stories about Muhammad, as you put it, being squeezed in a cave were. What he's referring to, folks, in case you might not know, is the first revelation when Gabriel, or whoever it was, he's not actually identified even in Bukhari, he's first appears to Muhammad and presses him so hard he thought he was going to die, it says. So this is a stark difference from the angelic visitations that are recounted in the Bible, where invariably the angelic visitor says, be not afraid, first off. And this one wants to terrify Muhammad into submission. And so I think that there's a very dark force behind all this, and that's why the angel is depicted in this way. But the provenance of the story could be anything. Could be that there was somebody who claimed to be a prophet, who may even have been known as Muhammad. But the idea that he did the things that are attributed to him, there's no historical basis for it. But I think it's very possible that stories of some prophet being visited by an angel, maybe a prophet Kutam or somebody else. And remember also there are variations in Gabriel's name, that Ibn Sa'd talks about the Seraphel, an angel Seraphel, who appeared to Muhammad for the first 3 years and then was replaced by Gabriel. So that would put Seraphel in the cave squeezing Muhammad. And so I think it's very possible there was somebody who claimed to be a prophet, and these traditions were floating around. And when the Muhammad myth was being constructed, they threw them in.
And we've got some more super chats to go through, but just by way of clarification, because I read, "Did Muhammad exist?" And I think it was at the very end when you said something like, "So did Muhammad exist?" If there was, you said, as far as some guy that we don't know a lot about going around claiming to be a prophet, maybe, but we just don't have enough to go on. So I'm thinking of like basically Joshua Little's idea that the hadiths are generally like significantly unreliable. In fact, let me read just this little section of his at the beginning of chapter 1, Methods and Debates, to give an idea here, and then I want to just tie this in. But he says that hadith are unreliable, that any given matan cannot be, so that's the actual content of the story, and then you have the isnad, that's the chain of transmission, how that story came to you. That hadith are unreliable, that any given matan cannot be taken at face value as an accurate datum from the first Islamic century, and that any given isnad chain cannot be taken at face value as an accurate record of a matan's provenance, cannot be seriously contested for multiple reasons. Firstly, there's an overwhelming prior probability based on the ubiquity of fabrication and pseudepigraphy in late antique and medieval religio-historical, pagan, Jewish, and Christian ascriptions. In other words, lots of people were fabricating stuff back then. Secondly, there is the high frequency of contradictions within the hadith corpus, which necessitates the occurrence of a huge amount of fabrication, interpolation, and or mutation, and therefore skepticism towards any given hadith. So he's pointing out the contradictions. They necessitate the idea that lots of people are making stuff up. Thirdly, there is the ubiquity of fabrication and interpolation, both reported and demonstrable in the hadith corpus, which again casts doubt upon the rest of the corpus. Fourthly, there is the rapid, extreme mutation and growth of reports that evidently took place over the course of a century or more of oral transmission, which means that any given matan, regardless of the isnad, is likely at best heavily distorted and at worst obliterated beyond its original form. He continues going on and on, point by point, showing why these hadiths are terribly, terribly unreliable. But Joshua Little believes that Muhammad existed, and he believes you can get to some reliable information about him. But when I'm reading this, because I'm reading this going, wow, he's actually making a good case that the hadith are a bunch of garbage, like significantly less reliable than I would have thought. So generally, when I approach the hadith over time, I look at it, and if I think, okay, some of these are obviously made up or include elements that are like obviously made up. Like the story of the guys who came to Muhammad and they got sick. They converted to Islam and they came to him and they got stomach aches and stuff. And he said, drink camel pee. And they went and drank camel pee. And it said, and then they were healed. And then they went on a killing spree and killed his shepherd and drove away all his camels. And then Muhammad got enraged and like burned out his eyes with hot nails. And then Allah gets mad at Muhammad and so on. So I'm looking at this and going, okay, so these guys were healed based on what Muhammad said, and then they flipped out and killed his shepherd? Like, does that make any... It makes... It's like... It clearly you're messing around with details. You don't get, I've just been healed. Wow, what a great guy. Let's go kill his shepherd. It doesn't make, it makes zero sense, right? You could in theory have one complete lunatic and he reacts like that because he's insane, but the entire group, we're all healed. Let's go kill Muhammad's shepherd and scatter his camels and stuff. Makes no sense. Far more likely, I'm looking at that, I'm like, it would be far more likely that Muhammad said, yeah, go drink camel urine. They went and drank camel urine. They got even worse. And then they flipped out. And he's like, this guy's a false prophet. Exactly. Let's go kill his shepherd and stuff. So anyway,
they have to cover up that part.
Yeah. So anyway, I look at that stuff and I say, oh, come on. You're obviously making stuff up. Same with the miracle stories. But if I look at it and I look at it if it's just normal stuff, I'm like, I don't have any reason to think that didn't happen. And then if I'm looking at other stuff going, okay, this was embarrassing to them, so it really doesn't look like there was a reason to invent it and so on. So that's historically how I look at the hadith. I don't trust it if I have a clear reason not to trust it. But then like you're kind of on the same page with Joshua Little here, that these hadiths are actually way more unreliable than I am aware of. But when I'm reading Joshua Little, who believes that Muhammad was real and so on, and that you can learn things about him, and he's saying, see, these 200 plus hadiths about Muhammad having sex with a 9-year-old girl, these hadiths are unreliable. In my mind, I'm looking at this going, well, at best, you show we just don't know, but that doesn't mean it did. That wouldn't mean that it didn't happen. That would just mean you are saying we can't trust these sources. We can't trust these sources. Wouldn't mean that he did or that he didn't. We just wouldn't know. So I wanted to ask you about that. Are you saying, I mean, you're clearly challenging the reliability of the sources and showing that they're contradictory and so on, which is very similar to how Joshua Little is addressing these sources.
Yeah, but he's not intellectually consistent. He's not intellectually honest, because ultimately he contradicts everything that he lays out in detail by accepting in the main lineaments of the story as if they were reliable, and he's just cut the basis out from doing that. It's like he's sitting up on the limb of a tree and cuts it out from under himself.
But I'm asking you about I want just as a clarification on your view.
Yeah.
Is your view, because there's two different ways you can go, and I'm saying this based on how I was looking at Joshua Little's. He's saying, oh, you can't trust these sources, and I'm thinking, oh, so at best I wouldn't know if Muhammad did or didn't. It doesn't mean he didn't. It just means I don't know. So when you're talking about maybe this goes back to this or maybe this goes back to that, and maybe there was a guy who was like Muhammad, is your actual position there's just this area and we can't see into it. We just can't see into it. So maybe there's this guy Muhammad going around and it's clearly doesn't, and maybe he's going around and claiming to be a prophet, or maybe there wasn't a guy named Muhammad. Is it just we don't know? Or is it, no, there wasn't a Muhammad that resembles what's in the Muslim sources?
David, the answer is a little bit of both. And actually, I should tell you that recently, this is not a digression, Hatun asked me to respond to Fareed, the Islamic apologist that we both know, about the early sources for Muhammad. And in the course of doing that with her, and watching Fareed's video, I happened to see that Joshua Little made a couple of videos about Muhammad's existence last year. I never knew they existed until last month, but they're from about a year ago. And I've been thinking if I ever get a minute, I should respond to those as well.
How long are they?
Joshua,
are they super long?
Like three and a half hours.
Oh.
Yeah, those marathon videos. And so, I just I don't have the energy for that. But
I'll tell you, if you ever find like a section of one that you want to respond to or something like that, we could always go through that, because I'd be interested. I'd be interested in that sort of thing.
Yeah, we should do that, because he is talking. I don't actually remember if he talks about you, but he certainly talks about me and talks about, did Muhammad exist? And this is where I thought the guy's just not, well, I don't think he's intellectually honest or consistent, but also he says, oh, Spencer's just doing this because he hates Islam and wants to make Islam look bad. No, because he hates Muslims, and wants to make Islam look bad. And I think, man, you don't know me. You don't know what's going on in my mind. I would never make that kind of claim about you. And I think that in the first place, that's just uncharitable. But quite aside from that, he also says that I'm inconsistent, because he says that I say we can't know if there was a Muhammad. There may have been some guy named Muhammad who did some things. Maybe he even claimed that he was a prophet. But we can't know what he did. We can't know how much of what's in Islamic tradition is really attributed to him. And when we come to Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, there is no existence of such a person, because we look at the material that forms his life, and it all comes from 200 years later. So he says that's not consistent. And what he claims is that when I'm talking to audiences that are less crazy, then I say there may have been some Muhammad. But when I'm talking to crazed right-wingers, then I say Muhammad didn't exist. And he claims that this is some inconsistency. Actually, it's just lazy thinking on his part. What I'm saying is entirely consistent, and it contains both of those ideas, that there may have been some guy who had this name and who even did some of the things that are attributed to him in the traditions. But we cannot say that Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, as depicted in Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Hisham, Ibn Sa'd, Waqidi, etc., and in the biographical, the Sirah sections of Bukhari and Muslim and all the rest, we can't say he existed. There's no evidence for him at all. And so even when I say that there may have been a Muhammad, it's entirely speculative. There may not have been as well. As you say, that period is just dense. It's closed off to us. It's obscure. It's opaque. But there is a remote possibility that some of this has some historical value. What of it has historical value? And how can we know? No way. We can't tell.
And that's why, yeah, I would be interested in seeing some of his defenses because, I mean, you look at how he describes the Muslim sources and how he's pointing out that this is kind of the general view that non-Muslim academics who specialize in hadiths have come to about the hadith reliability. I'm interested in how he thinks you can get to reliable information, given that he thinks the hadiths are significantly weaker than even I think. So in other words, he's in your same ballpark as far as these sources are like massive dumps of garbage.
Well, you'll find this video interesting. I'll send you the link after because it's 3.5 hours, as I said. But in it, he goes through all of the arguments against Muhammad's existence, or at least as he characterizes them, and claims to refute them. And so he's doing just the opposite of what he was doing in the section you read from his dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
Strange character.
Yeah. Weird dude. We'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Jack Ray says, seeking Muhammad, finding a null pointer exception. That is computer nerd stuff. It's when your null pointer exception, because I had to look it up. That's when you're trying to access something that doesn't exist.
There you go. I should have called this book Muhammad, the null pointer exception.
Hey, Robert, you nerd glasses clown. Wait. This is Sheikh Mike Wingjaling, so this is the Sheikh based on Mike Winger's character that you asked about. Hey, Robert, you nerd glasses clown. If Prophet, peace be upon him, Muhammad, peace be upon him, didn't exist, then who did Abu Talib miraculously breastfeed for 4 days, huh?
Yeah, you got me there. I'm bleeding now. But, nerd glasses are horn rims. These are not.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've been refuted again, and I'll block you later.
Yet again.
Thoughts on, from Messianic Apostate, thoughts on a 3-state solution? Daniel Pipes agrees. I'm not familiar with the 3-state solution.
Yeah, I don't know. I know Daniel Pipes, but I don't know what the 3-state solution is. Maybe Messianic Apostate, if you could drop it into the comments or whatever it is, then we can discuss it. But I don't know if that's something Daniel has in mind. I don't know. The 2-state solution is total fiction, because any Palestinian state is just going to be a jihad base to destroy what's left of Israel. They will never accept living side by side in peace with Israel because it goes against the jihad imperative. Drive them out from where they drove you out.
Yeah, and I don't even know I don't know what 3-state solution is referring to. Would that be like Israel and then Gaza is its own state and the West Bank is its own state? Or are you dividing it up based on ideas and saying, here's the Jewish state, here's the Muslim state, and here's the Christian state or something like that? Yeah, I don't know. But you do have this ongoing problem that one group there really, really wants to completely wipe out Jews. And so until they drop that idea, you have endless problems, which is why we keep pressing them, trying to get them to drop that idea. And we have multiple ways of doing that, either by showing that even according to Islam's most trusted sources, Muhammad is the most obvious false prophet in history, or as Robert and Jay are arguing, actually, you guys don't have enough to build your religion on, so give it up.
Yeah.
And what is this? Press Alt and Tab button will show all open windows to choose.
I don't understand.
Yeah, why would I want to do that? There's no scenario.
20th century guy.
Yeah, there's no scenario where we want to push a bunch of buttons and make our computer do a bunch of weird stuff. Hey, David, have you thought about writing a book on all the issues of Islam, or does a series of books like this already exist? Robert's done the writing on all these issues, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I have tried to cover all the issues of Islam. I got a book. I got the Critical Quran. I've got another book that's a popular guide to the Quran if you don't want to slog through every bit of the whole thing. I've got the straight biography of Muhammad. I've got the historical biography of Muhammad and the question of did Muhammad exist. And then I've got what nobody else has done, the history of jihad, that covers the whole thing, that is usually the part that people dealing with Islam ignore. And that's including the Islamic apologists. Everybody talks about Quran and Muhammad, but nobody talks about what happened after that. And what happens after that clears up a lot of the questions about Quran and Muhammad, because a lot of the Islamic apologists like to say, well, you're taking the Quran out of context, and that's not how we understand it. So you look into the Islamic history and you see, well, that's actually how they understood it all through the 1400 years of Islam. So that's compelling.
Green Peace of Mind says, say what you want about Game Grumps Aaron Hansen, but I think he hit it on the nose when he jokingly considered why people at the very core start warfaring, saying, duh, wait a minute, you're not me.
Okay.
Okay. That's all we can say to that one. Okay. Because we don't know who that is or what that's about. Can you talk about the Shia-Sunni split? Jay Smith says this is all political and it turned into a theological issue. So this is actually similar to questions that arise with a lot of what you're saying. You have two sort of issues. You have, this is the standard narrative in the Muslim sources, and then maybe that's not what actually happened and something else actually happened. But what are your thoughts about the Shia-Sunni split?
Well, the one big thing about it is that the rightly guided caliphs don't have much historical value either. There's not a whole lot of evidence of the existence of Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman and Ali. The first one we have a lot of historical evidence for is Muawiyah. And so that's a big problem for the standard story of the Sunni-Shia split, which is not really even a theological issue, but goes back to Aisha being enraged with Ali because when she was accused of adultery, Ali said, what are you getting so upset about, Muhammad? You can just get another woman. And she heard him and she was enraged. And so she always opposed him wanting to be caliph. But that's all legendary elaboration. It does seem to have been a political split that happened very early in the community, because the split in the community we have evidence for before we start getting the stories about why it happened.
In the same way Prophet Muhammad did not exist, neither does Winger. It's just D-Wood fabricating info. This is why we call you Winger and AP is Ali Dawa. Yeah, we had this funny thing, Robert, where we were asking Chat GPT about the apostate prophet, and it said his real name is Ali Dawa. So that's
I'm drinking water when you say that.
Yeah, so it's just, it's funny because Ali Dawa's real name is not Ali Dawa, right? But they thought the Chat GPT has assembled all the available information available on the internet and concluded that the AP is actually Ali Dawa. So interesting stuff.
That's beautiful.
For both of you, Hindus, Jews, or Christians, who's more aware of Islam's dangers? Rank them, please. Among countries, Israel fights it most, except China.
Well, look, you got Hindus, Jews, and Christians who have no clue about Islam and are essentially non-Muslim Islamic apologists. You also have Hindus, Jews, and Christians who know very well what Islam is all about and who speak honestly about it. So I don't know if you can rank them as a group. You have a lot of variations in all three.
Yeah, that is a tough thing, because you'd think, oh, look what's going on in Israel. Jews know what's going on. Well, you have tons of Jews, even in Israel, who think Islam is great and wonderful, and it's just so you've got that. Same with Christians. You've got Christians, especially. They seem to be like in Eastern Europe, where they seem to have a recollection of the Ottomans constantly trying to invade them and so on. But you go to the rest of the Christian world and nope, apart from a brief bit of awareness that they get after a terrorist attack or something like that, seem to be hell-bent on being completely clueless. Hindus, I don't know. I can't verify. I guess it would differ in region from Hindus. Like there are Hindus who are pretty close to a bunch of jihadis who would have and there might be Hindus in other areas where, hey, I get along with Muslims. And so I would guess Hindus would be as a group, if you were to like try to put together percentages of a population who are aware of how dangerous Islam is, because Hindus, they have the well, Islam's just been attacking for many centuries, and so it's been pretty relentless. Anyway, I have no official statistics. If I had to guess, I would suspect that Hindus have the highest percentage of being aware of Islam's dangers, but it's just kind of a feeling. It's not based on any actual statistics. Commentaries on Surah 53, e.g. Tabari, don't mention satanic verses. Instead, Surah 2252 does. They are explaining this verse and verifying Muhammad as a prophet. So yeah, you have in the history of At-Tabari, he talks about the satanic verses, and Jogs here is pointing out that it doesn't occur in commentaries on Surah 53. Surah 53, that's where the satanic verses were originally located before Muhammad got called out for it and they were taken out. But Surah 2252, yeah, you do find that in commentaries on the satanic verses about... so that's the passage. Oh, you know, all of God's prophets fall for Satan time to time and deliver some revelations from Satan. It happens to the best of them.
Yep.
Let's see. D. Wood, could you make videos about Shia Hadith as well? Probably not. I'll occasionally share one and so on, but someone else would need to do that. Someone who wants to, probably an ex-Shia who wants to go through the Shia sources and expose them. Dr. Spencer doesn't really care about apologetics. You can tell because he's always wearing a shirt.
Yeah.
Oh, look at the name, Muhammad Hijab part-time stripper. That's I forgot. I should have read that as Muhammad Hijab. Dr. Spencer doesn't really care about apologetics. You can tell because he's always wearing a shirt.
That's beautiful. I love it.
That's powerful stuff. Is there a valid shahada? There is no God but Allah, and Joseph Smith is his prophet. They were revealed by the same demon after all.
Well, you know, if you read No Man Knows My History by Fawn Brodie, it's a very interesting book about Joseph Smith. And in it, she quotes him. The big weakness of the book actually is that it's got no footnotes, and so I don't know what her sources are. And so it may be unreliable for all I know, but no authority on Mormonism. But in it, he starts to threaten that he's going to be the Muhammad of America and start to take up the sword. And nice. So a lot of interesting parallels there.
Nice. Hey, this is actually an interesting comment. So Dimos here says, I personally think Muhammad is like King Arthur, a later amalgamation of many warlords that lived in 6th century Middle East during the Arab conquest. That's actually an interesting, because you talk about like King Arthur. It does sound like something. It's similar with like Robin Hood or something like that. And that we have these later stories and these later legends. What was the actual person like? And the answer is we don't know. We have the later legends to go on. So whether there was some original figure who was going around, or if it was like, they're taking pieces of different figures and stuff and sort of compiling them into a story of one guy, or it was just originally a fabrication that caught on, that we just don't know. Is that basically similar to your view of Muhammad?
Yeah, that's spot on. As a matter of fact, I've used the Robin Hood analogy in the past, that historians generally say he was a real guy. But did he have Friar Tuck and the Merry Men and rob from the rich and give to the poor and all that? We can't know anything about him. And it's the same thing with Muhammad. There could have been somebody around whom these legends started to grow. There may not have been as well.
Goat Hub says, you know what's real, though? Christ is Lord. That is true.
Okay.
It's the first comment from Goat Hub that was not horribly offensive. That's I think that channel came up, Robert, and we were talking about the statistics on what people watch in Pakistan. And we said their porn site would be called Goat Hub based on their their love of animal. Anyway, they lead the world in that sort of thing.
Oh my goodness.
Hu Jintao says, we all moved to Goa, India, beautiful beaches, 25% Christians, 70% Hindus, living in harmony, no BS, only 4% Muslim, mostly selling dim sums and beer at beaches. Yeah, we're going there. So now we know our location we're moving to when things get too awful and terrible in Europe and America. Please
Way
tell A.
back when I was in, I got to say, way back when I was in college, I had a friend went to Goa, and he came back. He said, "I have a doppelganger there. A guy looks just like me." So I'd be afraid to go to Goa because I'd
Uh-oh.
end up looking at myself.
Uh-oh.
I don't know.
People might run up to you. Hey,
You owe me 100 rupees.
yeah, give it to me. I'm beating the crap out of you. It wasn't me. Now we have Herbert the cricket. Please tell AP to take his shoes off of me. He threw his stinky shoes on top of me in the closet last week, and now I'm trapped and unable to chirp. AP had a cricket in his room and couldn't find it, and it was chirping the entire time we were live, and so he actually named it Herbert. And AP,
Mossad moved his shoes. That's why.
yeah. Yeah, the Jews did it. AP plays weird German military music in his room all day, and I can't sleep. He also has this war memorabilia in his closet. It looks fashionable. Yep, and we have an insider with Herbert the Cricket commenting on AP's room. Solaria says it's to force Egypt to accept God. Oh, is this the three-state? Is this the three-state? So the three-state solution.
Looks like it.
Okay, it's to force Egypt to accept Gaza and Jordan to accept the West Bank so that Israel has uncontested territorial boundaries, Palestinians two states.
Well, if Egypt is taking Gaza and Jordan, the West Bank, what state do the Palestinians have? And anyway, it would be unworkable because you're forcing Israel back to the 1967 borders, which are 9 miles wide from the river to the sea, or from the Judea and Samaria to the sea at one point. They're practically indefensible, especially nowadays. So it would just be a prelude to the total destruction of Israel.
Yeah, these are very rough situations. Like, if you somehow knew that Egypt was just going to take control of Gaza and not let the terrorists do what they want and so on, you'd think, oh, good idea. On what planet would you think, or would you think that you actually know what they're going to do in that situation? So this is what Islam does. It over and over again puts you in a situation where you have no idea what's going to happen. There are no good solutions to anything, and just keeps trying to create havoc with the goal that you'll eventually just accept Islam in order to avoid the endless chaos created by this religion. Mm-hmm. Here you go, Robert. If Muhammad did not exist, then whose remains are present in the grave of the Prophet's mosque in Medina?
Well, it could be anybody. What are you going to do? Look for his dental records? There's no way to tell who's in there, if anyone. And the fact is that the grave itself dates from the 9th century, just like the Hadiths. So where was his body for 200 years before that?
That would be one way to refute Robert here, ladies and gentlemen. Get the government of Saudi Arabia to agree to exhume Muhammad's fragmentary remains, get some DNA, and then test them against some people who claim to be his modern descendants, like Sheikh Yaqubi claims to be like his 34th grandson and so on. And hey, if they match, now keep in mind, even if they're related, that wouldn't prove that it's Muhammad. But I would say that if you show DNA evidence of what this guy has, what Muhammad's descendants have been claiming, that we all go back, and then you were actually to test the body that's in there, and it actually lined up with their story, I would say that's pretty good. That's pretty good circumstantial evidence that those two things lined up. So you heard it here, folks. If you really want to refute, the Muhammad theory that Robert Spencer is promoting, that's one way you could add some credibility to your case. Philip says, Robert, do you consider Ashkenazism to be Middle Eastern? We cluster genetically between Greeks and Levantines. Are we the Rachel Dolezal of Semites? That was that woman who claimed to be black.
Yes. All I know about Ashkenazim is this. I've written this book, Anti-Semitism, History and Myth. It should be out next March. It's all done, but they hold my books for so long. And so it's just sitting there now, and it won't be out till the spring. But in any case, I've got a bit on that. Actually, I've got a whole section in the book on a lot of the primary anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and one of them is that the Ashkenazim are actually the Khazars from the Ukraine area and not from the Middle East at all. And I showed genetic studies indicating that they are indeed from the Levant, as you say, genetically between Greeks and Levantines. And so there's no substance to that. But beyond that, I can't really say anything about them.
Come on, you can milk anything with nipples, David. Guess the movie. That is Meet the Parents. People were posting that comment in response to Muhammad being breastfed by his uncle Abu Talib. But don't know if you ever saw that, Robert, but it was Robert De Niro.
No.
It was Robert De Niro and Ben Stiller. Ben Stiller was up making up a story and stuff, and he kept digging himself deeper and deeper, trying to make up a story about when he was having to milk a cat and stuff like that. And they said, "You can milk a cat?" And he says, "Oh, yeah, you can milk anything with nipples." And Robert De Niro goes, "I've got nipples, Greg. Can you milk me?" But it was
maybe he's Abu Talib.
Abu Talib. And it is an answer to an ongoing question. Can men give birth? Can men have a menstrual cycle? Can men breastfeed? Absolutely, according to Shia sources on Muhammad's uncle. That was for Robert to access the relevant window quicker when multiple windows are open while doing Jihad Watch Live. Press Alt plus Tab button.
Okay, well, thank you, but I have solved that problem. Actually, somebody solved that problem for me. Thank you to, I'm sorry I didn't get the name, but whoever it was who suggested that I just make a list of all the things that I'm going to talk about in order with the URL of the stories and click on them as I go. And that's worked the last 2 weeks very well.
Okay.
And I think they've been better shows.
So Robert does have a solution. Robert, if that solution doesn't work out long term, then you have another. You can go back to this and scroll through and find that. Jews fled Italy to Germany in 800s, fleeing jihad.
Yeah, you can read about that in the history of jihad. The Muslims occupied Sicily. They were there for a few hundred years. I think the mafia might arise out of Islam when you think about the murders, the code of silence, the death penalty for leaving, things like that. But anyway, yeah, well, Jews fled a lot of places to get away from jihad.
Hi, guys. Feels like losing battle with Islam, regardless of whether Muhammad existed or not. Any thoughts on the UK and West trajectory timeframe?
Well, yeah, it's dire, and they look like they're Islamizing. But I'll tell you something else. There is a reason for hope, and it is this, that the internet exists. David and I are having this discussion. Somebody in Saudi Arabia tomorrow could watch this. That has never been possible in the history of Islam until now. And so all over the Islamic world, I'd actually, you know something, David? I got the greatest message the other day. One of the best messages I have ever received in decades of doing this, from a man who grew up in Iran. And he said that when he was young in Iran, he came across a badly scanned bootleg copy of The Truth About Muhammad, and it blew his mind, and he ultimately ended up leaving Islam. And I thought, well, that makes it all worthwhile. And so, it looks like they're winning now. It looks like because of the stupidity and the treasonous character of our own leaders in the West, that the West is going to be conquered and Islamized, but the story isn't over. And the Islamic world itself is a lot weaker than it may appear, because it's full of people like that man who wrote to me. And they are waking up to the truth because of information that had never been accessible in that part of the world before.
And Robert, by the way, that's why I mentioned that the truth about Muhammad. Again, I read that long time ago, before anyone ever heard of me, and so on. I read The Truth About Muhammad, and that's why I mentioned that it's available in PDF, even though people could still buy it. I know there are people in parts of the world where they're not going to be able to get a copy, and so that was just a little. Hey guys, you can still find that and get all that awesome information. But yeah, guys, this is the. I mean, the apostasy rate among young Muslims went from close to 0% to 24% in a period of like 15 years. And people are like, oh no, there's no hope. What are you talking about? The apostasy rate went like that. It went like that. And that's one of the reasons you have so much chest thumping and so on. Is, oh, we're going to conquer you. They're compensating and trying to act strong when they know Islam is being destroyed from within. So if it were just whether Islam is strong enough to take over, I'd say, no, it's a complete joke. As long as people were properly and as long as non-Muslims were properly informed on what to do right now. The problem is you have so many people saying, please come, we are begging to be subjugated. Please, we can't get enough of this great stuff. Please. Oh, please. Thank you, sir. May I have another? Please beat us more. That's the problem. So yeah, there is reason for hope. If we can get past that, Islam is way weaker than people realize, because as Robert's pointing out, we've never been in this situation before. We've never been in this situation where you can expose it on a global scale, where you can expose the Dawah lies on a global. This is brand new. This is within our lifetimes. We had this, and we see the impact of it, skyrocketing apostasy rates. So you can look around in the world and have all kinds of reasons to be like, oh, this is bad. This is really, really bad. You also have reasons to look around and go, if we can just get our act together, this is a lot weaker than people think.
Exciting times.
Who says, David, please invite Robert regularly. This might be the only place we can ask him specific questions via super chats. D Wood, racist, AP sucks and hates India. That's one of the best sentences I've ever seen. D Wood, love D Wood. It says, love D Wood, racist, AP sucks and hates India. Wow.
Get a t-shirt made.
It's funny, Robert, like I'll have a show with AP not on there and people talk trash about AP, and then like if he's like people attacking like, what are you doing with a Christian? You're supposed to be on our side, the atheist side.
Yeah. That's crazy stuff, man. It's amazing to me that these atheist guys, they love to destroy Christianity and make fun of Christianity, but then they have these Islamic apologists on and act as if they are being even-handed when actually they're defending Islam and knocking only Christianity. It's very strange to me.
Mm-hmm. Very weird. A couple final super chats here. What evidence could falsify both of your positions? I.e., what type of evidence would convince Robert Muhammad was a real G and D Wood that he's fictional?
Okay, I believe that Muhammad was historical if you found a 7th century source that said something, even a little bit, of what he's supposed to have said and done. That acknowledged that he was a prophet, that he started a new religion, that he's got this holy book, the Quran, and that maybe he said a few of the things that he's famous for saying. That would be, I think, very compelling, but there is no such document.
But basically, theoretically, they could find a doc, because that's happened with like Christian writings and Bible manuscripts and stuff, that all of a sudden you find something that's inside the walls of, and they have found, older Quran manuscripts in various places. So it's always possible that in the future, they're going to open up some wall and find some 7th century document that's talking about something Muhammad did. So in other words, something like that could make you rethink your position, but you're saying until we have something like that, then.
Yeah, and also when you mention those early Qurans that they've discovered recently, there was a whole lot of crowing about that. I actually revised Did Muhammad Exist because of that. I wrote Did Muhammad Exist in 2010, if I recall correctly, and then a new edition, revised and expanded, came out a couple years ago, and I did it because I was getting a lot of emails from people saying, oh, you have to retract. You have to withdraw your book now because we found this ancient Quran. And you actually read about the ancient Quran. It was carbon dated to between 570 and 635 or something like that. If it's dating from 570, it's before Muhammad. And so it's only more of an indication that this was material that was pre-existing, that was Christian and Jewish material that was adapted to become the Quran. And so that's no evidence for Islam at all, actually just the opposite.
And I would say, as far as my perspective, what could convince me that Muhammad is fictional, I don't know, apart from being in a similar situation where you found like the true origin of the story and you found that it was made up, I could be persuaded that we just don't know anything. We don't know enough. We don't know enough to know whether he was real or fictional or something like that. And that would,
David,
what?
you know what's going to convince you that Muhammad was fictional?
Let me guess. Your book, Muhammad, A Critical Biography. Again,
That's it, man.
Yeah, again, guys. This is a brand new. It's a brand new book. Link is in the description box to get this. Also, the Critical Quran and the History of Jihad. Some basically books Critical Quran and especially History of Jihad. You absolutely need those in your library, everyone. This new book, definitely want to get it. Read it and leave a review, because this is brand new stuff out there, and apparently Amazon is suppressing stuff.
Yes, Amazon's taking out good reviews and even deep sixing good ratings. So if you get the book, you like the book, please leave a verified purchase review. They don't take those down, as far as I know. I haven't seen them anyway, and so that would be a big help. Also, David, we got to get. I know you got another show, but we got to remember we got to get to Zayd and Zainab before we go.
Yeah, we got these last 2 or 3 super chats, and then we'll close out with the question about Zayd and Zainab and watch you fail to explain that away. But Robert, does your book get destroyed by the leather straps? Indeed,
this book destroys all leather straps.
Hector says, Robert, if you were a devout Muslim, would you rather have a lifetime supply of pure, authentic Zamzam water or 1 glass of milk straight from Abu Talib?
You can get Zamzam water. You can actually order it online.
Yeah, so you would obviously rather have the 1 glass of milk straight from Abu Talib, because that's harder to come by.
Yeah, that's rarer, but it might be too pricey for me,
All right, Robert, who invented Muslim Muhammad and around what time? So if this was invented, when do you think?
I think it was started to be invented in the 690s, but that it really picks up in the 700s and especially in the 800s. And the originators were Abdul Malik, the caliph, from 685 to 705, and Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, the governor of Iraq, from around the same time. Very telling hadith. An old man, he says, we never read the Quran in the mosques until the time of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. Well, why not? Maybe because there was no Quran until the time of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf.
All right, Robert. So, in the Quran and the Muslim sources, we have a lot of explaining. We have a lot of explaining to do. Now, the historical narrative is that Muhammad had an adopted son named Zayd, and he went to visit his adopted son one day, and instead of running into his adopted son, he ran into his adopted son's wife, who was Muhammad's first cousin and one of the hottest women in Arabia. She was wearing almost nothing at the time. Muhammad saw her, walked away, praising Allah. Oh, praise Allah, alhamdulillah, so beautiful. Oh, praise be Allah, who causes the hearts to turn. His adopted son Zayd finds out about this, says, "Oh, Prophet, you can have her, I'll give her to you." Muhammad, and then Muhammad is worried about people making fun of him for basically what people thought of as incest, even though it is adopted. They still thought of it as like, that's your adopted son's wife, you freak. So he was worried about it, so he didn't want to marry her, and then Allah orders him to, and Allah says, you have to marry that woman so that other people understand that it's okay to take the wives of their own adopted sons. And then, long story short, Allah has to abolish adoption in order to justify this sort of thing. So there's no more adoption in Islam. Robert, why in the name of common sense would someone fabricate that sort of thing if they're fabricating information?
In the first place, I got to say, this is the strongest part of your argument. I don't think there's any better piece of evidence you could bring. Maybe you'll surprise me when we debate it. I'm sure you will. But I don't think there's any better case for saying that Muhammad's historical than this story, because it does seem to be, it's clearly embarrassing to Muslims at the time, unlike the Aisha stories. It's embarrassing to the Muslims when they write it because people are grumbling, and this is why he has to explain it away with the adoption business. But there is an explanation. It comes right in the Quran. When Zayd had performed the necessity formality from her, we gave her to you in marriage, so that this is 33:37, so that there may be no sin for believers in regard to the wives of their adopted sons, when the latter have performed the necessary formality from them. The commandment of Allah must be fulfilled. There is no reproach for the prophet in what Allah has prescribed for him. That was Allah's way with those who passed away of old, and the commandment of Allah is certain destiny, who delivered the messages of Allah and feared him, and feared no one except Allah. Allah keeps good account. Muhammad is not the father of any of your men, but he is the messenger of Allah and the seal of the prophets, and Allah is always aware of all things. That's the key to the story right there. It seems like a non sequitur. Now, the Quran's full of non sequiturs, and so maybe it's just a non sequitur. But I think this is actually a coherent part of the story. That 33:40 says, once again, Muhammad is not the father of any of your men, but he is the messenger of Allah and the seal of the prophets. The whole point of the story is to show that, because they wanted to seal the prophethood. They wanted, the early Muslims, when they were creating this, wanted to make Muhammad the last prophet. Because obviously, if you're creating a prophet in order to be the unifying principle of your state, remember, in those days, they didn't have parliaments and constitutions. The way the unity of a state was preserved was by a religion. The Byzantines, the Roman Empire, was Christian. The Persians, the other great power of the day, were Zoroastrian. The Arabs amassed this huge empire, and they didn't have a unifying religion. They made one up. And they made it martial, aggressive, expansionist, and violent, because that's what they were. And those were the qualities they wanted to preserve and encourage, so that their empire would be preserved and grow. So, if you are fabricating a story in order to hold your empire together, the last thing you need is another prophet coming along to say, no, now the story is this, and he becomes his followers become a rival power center. You want to concentrate all the power in yourself. So he's got to be the last prophet, this guy you're making up. So how do you make sure he's the last prophet? First, he has no male heirs. And second, he has no adopted sons. Because in the Islamic tradition, there is the idea that the prophets are all related. Remember, Jesus is Moses' nephew and Miriam's son, according to the Islamic accounts, that later they also have to explain that away. But the idea that all the prophets are relatives, which is continued in the Shiite tradition, in the idea that the Imam of the Shiites has some prophetic power from Muhammad, and that's because he's part of Muhammad's household. And all the Imams have to be a relative of Muhammad so that they have this prophetic power and the infallibility. So, how do you make sure Muhammad's the last prophet? You make up stories in which he has no sons. All his sons die in young ages. And his adopted son, you make up an adopted son and then show him repudiating the adopted son. And you make it about how he's such a virile guy. Because also, see, we're looking at this from the standpoint of our own Christian morality. And then this guy is a total horn dog, and he can't control himself. And so even his adopted son has to say, take my pretty wife. You can have her. And they know, and this is Muhammad being weak. But from the standpoint of those fabricating the story, this is Muhammad being strong. He's such a man. The virility is so bursting out of him. You know, he's got semen all over his clothes that Aisha has to clean off. And he is taken with the son's wife, and so he's got to have her. And so in the process, Allah cancels adoption and says that even his adopted son is not his son. So all the possible heirs who could be prophets are closed off. And all you have is the remnant is the Shiite idea that the Imam is one of his household, but it's not nearly the same thing. It's not like he's a new prophet, the Imam of the Shiites. So, in that being the case, the whole point of the story is Muhammad is not the father of any of your men, but rather he is the seal of the prophets.
Well, I look forward to...
As Sam would say, boom!
I look forward to completely humiliating you on that point here in the next couple of months. Last couple super chats here.
So,
What books about Islam have been removed from libraries? Would love to promote them during banned books weeks. You familiar with any of that?
oh, my books have been removed from plenty of libraries. You could name them all as banned books. I actually heard from a librarian a few years ago who wanted to stock one of my books, and the librarian said, no, 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 this would be, I mean, the head librarian, because this was a librarian wanted to stock it, and they said, no, 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 that would be Islamophobic. We can't have books like that in the library. And so, if Banned Books Week were real, it would feature my books and books of other critics of Islam.
Yeah, it is weird that in the U.S. you can't have anything criticizing Islam that anyone can access. Weird stuff. Robert, please team up with Odon LaFontaine and Saint Marad. You have that
Like Mary Harb, I've never heard of them. It may be a great team, but I don't know them.
We have two comments here. Last two. Just purchased The History of Jihad on Audible. Please make all your books available on Audible. And then...
Hey, that's me. The History of Jihad on Audible is me voicing it. That's the only one of my books I've ever done. But Audible decides which books they're going to do, and I have no power over that. So people ask me, is this book going to be available on Audible? I don't know.
And then Ricky Bobby says there are 9 books on Audible. I know there are more than 9 books on Audible. So they're talking about 9 of your books available on Audible?
Yeah, probably. But I would expect there are more than that, because usually they go on sales and they generally sell pretty well.
Interesting. All right, guys. Well, that's our show. Robert giving everyone an introduction to his ideas and his latest book that's bringing together some ideas that he's been going through over the years. And here's the thing, guys, for all of you who are worried, and is there these things all tie together? Is there hope for us? Is there hope for us? Guys, we live in a time where you can grab some books and learn to do what people for 14 centuries haven't had the ability to do. So this is the time we're living in right now. If you're concerned, you've got something you can do. The nightmare situation is you see a big problem and there's nothing you can do about it. We're not in that position. You see a problem and there's a clear path to what you can do about it. So thanks to Robert for being here. And guys, definitely everyone needs History of Jihad. If you have to learn that material. That would be life-changing if that sort of information became common knowledge. The Critical Quran, you can read through the entire Quran and get the critical commentary. And now Robert's got a critical biography going through the information about Muhammad and why you might not be able to trust what you think you can trust. I'm actually sorry. A couple of people still sending in super chats. Can't get to those right now because I'll be live again here in a few minutes. It's not just a promo for some Bible study software. Things are all changing completely on Monday, so it's actually people's last chance to get the Bible software the way they're getting it now. And so anyone wanted to inform everyone about that. Meanwhile, Robert, apart from getting your books, those links are in the description box. How can people follow you?
Yeah, at jihadwatch.org. That's where you can find the sources for all of the Jihad Watch stories that we speak about at This Week in Jihad. I saw yesterday, as a matter of fact, David, some people saying, what is the source? Where are you finding all this? You can always find the stories at jihadwatch.org. And many others as well that we don't have time to get to. And at Jihad Watch RS on Twitter. And the books are at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, and wherever fine books are sold.
Indeed. All right, guys. So get those books. You definitely need them. And be sure to follow Robert on Twitter. Follow his YouTube channel where we do This Week in Jihad. And definitely follow his site, Jihad Watch. That and Religion of Peace, the Religion of Peace channel. That's where, if you want to stay updated on everything that's going on in the world with respect to jihad, that's where you have to go. All right. I will see anyone who is interested in the best Bible software on the planet. I'll see you guys in a few minutes. Catch you next time.